to be a not quite a beginner nowhere tutorial, but rather an idea of you kind of know a little bit about the basics of setting up a world, and then what it's really about, the whole session about path animation is about adding pizzazz to your world. So you look around this world in particular. That's kind of why I wanted to start it in here. And you see the rockets moving around. They're following a path. The teleports, not the teleports, but the transport pads that you can actually go on to take you out to the statue. Everything that's animated here in this world is following a path, or it's animated based on the path. So that's what I figured I'd show the group today. And the way I'm planning to do that is, let me share my screen.
Oh, and I was just going to add that when Rod broadcasts the screen, if you click on the screen, you should see a little square to go full screen. So then you can see everything that he's doing up close and follow along a little bit better. Yeah.
This is a nowhere world that I've created, and I've used two assets primarily. A world that I found on Sketchfab, and I'll open the browser just real briefly for a second so you can see some resources that are available to you as developers and people that want to basically not start from scratch, so to speak, but you might find a asset on Sketchfab or some other location that looks neat to you, and you want to basically bring it into your world and use it. There's a lot out here. So I've chosen this world, and I've also chosen this really cool butterfly that's got 2 or 3 animations to it. And the idea that I had was to essentially go into Blender and create a nowhere world where you could essentially be inside this world from Sketchfab. And you'd see the little butterfly here. And this is the general world. And the way this world's set up is I have over here on the top right, you can see the model. You know, if I hit the eye to hide it and show it, that's what this is. I have the surface, which is the separate land that you would walk on. And there's a collision for it. So this is what you need for a nowhere world. And then, of course, the cone is the person here in red. That's where you drop into the world. And there's a trigger that I've kind of preset up and hidden, but this is what we're going to use to actually launch animations. The intent of this session is really, though, about path animations. So the other idea I had about this world is it would be really cool to use the animation the butterfly has to have it kind of go through in and out of the scene, almost like a figure 8. And that's where curves come into play in Blender. So the way that I figured I'd show you how to do this is up here in the top left is your Blender object and edit modes and things that you can do. And one of the things that you can add is a curve. And this is where path animations start. And you have a lot of varieties, but the 2 that I can mention are Bezier curves and path. Right, so path. And those are the 2 that you could really use for most of your animations in a nowhere world where things move around. I'm going to start with a path, though. And what a path is, and if I hide the model here just for a second, you see this little line here. And if I go into edit mode just by hitting tab, you'll see essentially arrows that help with the directionality of the path, the curve, which way things are going to move as you go, as you take an object and send it down the path. And these little points here are things that you can actually move. You can move and create directionality and curves and things like that. Now, one of the things that we want to do with this world, if I go back to show the Sketchfab world, is we want the curve to kind of bounce around underneath this little overhang here and go around this up through here. And the way that you can do that is to position this curve. Let me go back into object mode, and I'll push it over here. I'll do a grab and then push it over here. So the starting point is essentially over here. And so I'm going to go back into edit mode. And with this path selected, now I can start moving things around. So I can, send it this way. Basically, I'm grabbing things. And, just dawned on me, one of the things I like to do is I'll show you my screen strokes. So down here in the bottom left, you'll see the keys and things that I'm pushing to make all this happen. But again, the path, what I'm trying to do is get it to go in a figure eight around here. So a path and a Bezier, what's the difference? Well, a path primarily is a curve where all the points are essentially smooth, rounded curves. So everything's smooth. And a Bezier is a little bit more complicated, not really so much, but it can do both smooth and essentially jointed curves. So that means where one point comes into the curve and goes out of the curve, they can be at angles, not necessarily smooth. So that's the primary difference, and I'll show you how we're going to use that just a little later. But anyway, so this curve, as you get it, you get 5 points to extend. So now, in order to get more points, you hit extrude, right? And now I can kind of basically go around the path that I want to go. So I'm going to put my model back on just for a second so I can see things. And I know that I'm essentially going to really quickly just extrude, extrude, extrude. I may need to bounce the other side of this. Extrude, extrude, extrude. And you can kind of see what I'm doing here. I'm just manipulating the path points so I can get a curve that goes all the way around where I want it to go. Okay. And if you can imagine at the moment, what we'll do is we'll send a butterfly, that butterfly model, around this curve so it appears like it's flying around. So that's really just the basics of setting up a path. And let me finish a couple things here. And of course, now I've got these 2 points, right? This point and the starting point. And maybe I want to just go a little further with this point. At a certain point, what I can do with the curve is I can tell it, I'd like this curve to be connected to each other. So the way that you do that with these points is you can essentially go up to segments or control points and toggle cyclic, right? So if you see what it did there, it basically connected my points all the way to the beginning. Okay, and now I've got essentially a looping curve where everything's going to go together. So I believe control points has a curve. Here it is, under curve, toggle cyclic. Okay, so most of the points in here are already smooth, but what I'm going to do, just kind of for the sake of the time that we have, really, is I've got a curve that I'd already set up, right? The Bezier curve. That was kind of the simple point of creating a curve, right? To just basically create a curve, grab points, move them around, and then hit extend E, the extrude key, to just keep going. And basically at the very end, if you want your curve to connect to each other, you just go into curve and toggle cyclic. Kind of that's the simple explanation of a curve. The curve that's a Bezier curve, let me get rid of this one I've just created because I just threw it together. And let me get back into object mode here. And I'll go into, get rid of him. And here's this Bezier save curve. And the only difference between this curve and the other curve is that what I kind of know that I want to do is I want to have this butterfly that I intend to fly around this path be able to land and then take off from certain points. So that's where you see, instead of smooth pointed curves, right, smooth all the way around. If I hit edit mode in this one, what you can see is if I hit a point, in Bezier mode, you get these two twigs, so to speak, control handles. And with these control handles, remember I said the Bezier has also the option of creating curves that where the points come together and they can kind of be abrupt, right? You can force a point and then they have angles. So I can grab this point and tweak it around, and you see the curve goes with it. So that's all the difference really is for the point of our topic here. In Blender, the way that you manipulate or some of the other properties with curves, you'll find that right down here in the bottom right. See this little green tab right here. Again, with Nowhere World kind of developers, most of what we do is in this this tab right here, where we create the content, the screen panels and things like that. And of course, this is the material tab, and there's other things. This is going to be the constraints. We'll go over here in a second. But for curves, the thing that's important to really know here is the twist method gives you kind of options on how you want your model to flow around this path. Z up basically says for the flow of the path, keep a constraint called follow path. And what I can then do with this constraint is I can tell it to target the Bezier curve. And you see how it jumped over there to the curve. We're halfway there, actually. So this butterfly and its object are now sitting on the path, okay? But what I wanted to do is follow this curve, and you'll see that what he ends up doing is he actually turned around, right? So that's his actual normal facing direction based on this relationship. Now, what I can do, and one of the controls they give you in Blender, though, is what is forward. I can define what is forward for this constraint. And this is where, right now, he's facing backwards. He's going the wrong way. So what I want him to do is follow the other direction. And I can basically tell it to follow the forward axis of negative y. So now I've corrected him. So this is kind of important just to remember, is that you have control over the directions that your objects are going to follow. And then Blender basically gives you really finite control of which way you want forward to be when you're going along this path. Okay. And now if I basically scrub this line, what you're going to end up seeing happening here, which is really kind of cool, is that, right, the object will follow the path and basically stick to the curve. And that's why we were tilting and banking and things like that. And you can see what it's going to do is it's going to come up, come down, and then basically float around. So that's how you essentially create an attached object to a curve such that it'll follow the motion that you want it to follow. Okay. Now what we need to do, though, because of Babylon, remember the end result for Nowhere World is going to be in a Babylon environment that's using GLTF animations. It doesn't know anything about curves, constraints, and things like that. So what we need to do is we need to bake the animation, this path animation, everywhere it's turning, every angle it's taking, essentially every keyframe into the butterfly parent object. Okay, and so what? One more thing I wanted to mention here about the curve itself. One of the properties it has down here, basically back in the tab curve section, is I can tell it how long would this path be frame-wise if it went from point A to point B, from basically loop start to loop end. And that's where this path animation frames area comes in. So again, I'm back down here in the properties tab for the curve object, and I can adjust the amount of frames that I want this whole animation to be. And this is just the starting point because we're going to manipulate this later. So I've set it at 500 because I figured that's a pretty long path. So let me give it enough frames to essentially go around and run its path kind of at normal frames. Now, normally when in Blender or our nowhere worlds, we're running things at either 24 or 30 frames a second. So this thing's going to take, like 10 seconds, 10, 15 seconds to move all the way around the path. I'm also baking in enough keyframes so that I can manipulate them later, so I can do things like stop and start and things like that. So essentially, we're at this point where now we have this butterfly parent that's got the constraint, and essentially what we want to do with this object, this butterfly parent object, is bake the animation. The way we do that is we go to Object, Animation, Bake Action, and as soon as you click that button, you'll see that we have how many frames do you want, where's the starting frame, and the important thing that we need to do is we need to hit these two buttons, Visual Keying and Clear Constraints. And what this is going to do is this is going to say, for every frame along the path, record in the transform and the keyframes transform the direction, rotation, location, all of that stuff. And then at the end of the whole thing, once you're all done, clear the constraint on the butterfly parent. Take that Bezier curved saved object and remove this whole little constraint. Basically, it's no longer needed at that point in time. So if I click this button, okay, it's going to take a few seconds, right? And what it generated is all of these keyframes, okay? And what it did also is you see that it actually removed the constraint that we had before that defined. So now essentially this parent object has a new animation, all these keyframes, and right now it's got an action called action, but I want to call that butterfly move. Right? Just to give it a name, because all actions, when you just do it like a bake action, gets this very simple action name, and that's not really too informative. But butterfly move is at least an action that I can be aware of. So at this point in time, I've baked the animation into the object, and I need a way to play it, right? And the way that we play this animation is we basically open up our trigger, right? This trigger, this big yellow box, this cylinder that has opened up, I hide it by default, but the trigger is Nowhere's tool to allow us to control when and how animations start. So if I go into the tab related to Nowhere and scroll to the bottom, what you'll notice is I've got essentially an action, a trigger properties that starts animation actions. And you'll see this idle skeleton. Well, that happens to pertain to this one, right? This butterfly right here. But now I've got this brand new animation that I also want to run when we go into our world. And I'm going to add an action. And now I can add that new butterfly move that I just created. And I want to set him up so he loops, right? So when we're in the world, that he's just flying around constantly, right? And if I put my world back on and I file save, right? Because we need to save all the time. Essentially, let me go into my export. And if we export this world now, it takes a few seconds because we're baking a lot of keyframes into the GLTF file that's going to result. And you see export was completed. And if I open up my world runner and I go to my output and now I open it, we'll just kind of watch him for a second. What he's doing is he's flying around but one thing I'm noticing is that his wings aren't really moving too much. They're just kind of like doing the default fly. So I need to go back into my Blender world, and it looks like the one that I'm missing, the one that I'm not running full time, is this animation related to the butterfly, which is hover O2, right? So if I go back into my trigger, and I add another action, hover O2, file save and file export. What I want it to do all while he's going around this curve is be flapping his wings, right? So that's the hover animation that controls that part. So if I reload this world, see how he's flapping his wings full time now? That's the animation that runs. Actually, it's a periodic run. It'll, oh, you know what I didn't do? What I didn't do is tell it to loop. So one more time, and hopefully this will be the last. It's always demo time jitters, right? Where you forget to do certain steps. But this one basically would say, keep flapping your wings all while the parent object is moving around the track. Let's try one more time here. Okay, so now he's flapping his wing, still flapping his wing. That's a much better sign. Okay, he's going to go up to the top here. We pass by. Let's see where we are here. Okay, so I think it's looking much better. But there's one thing that I kind of wanted to do. I want him to stop on these places where I've created the points that blend together through kind of a hard angle, right? And the way that I do that is through manipulating the keyframes. Okay, so I can basically come out of here, and if I go into the butterfly parents animation, okay, let me get rid of the trigger here, and I scrub along. I scrub along to the point where my butterfly is going to stop and take a rest for a minute right there. What I can do is I can swipe all these keyframes and essentially move them way out here. So now what he's going to do is he's going to stop there, and you can see he's kind of still moving. So what we need to do is we need to take this last keyframe and what I'm trying to do is turn off the screen keys capture. This is kind of messes it up a little bit. Swipe the last keyframe, copy, and paste so that it really stays put all this time, at least from a curve movement around the curve perspective. And then at a certain point, he'll slowly, from this keyframe to this keyframe, start taking off again. And I want him to do the same thing over here at this point. Right here is where he would take off again. So I swipe all these keyframes, grab them, and then do what I did before, essentially take this last keyframe, which is the stopping point, put him out here somewhere, and then it'll gradually take off again after a second or so. Okay, so now if I do a file save, export, you can essentially do long stops. You can do a pause like I'm doing, where it's just the same animation, but basically has breaks in the process. And if I do this now, if I bring it back in, let's watch it again. So I want him to stop in those two places up on top. And by manipulating the keyframes, right, he stopped, he's taking a break, and about a second or two later, he then starts off in the process. Now he's going to stop right there, take a break, and then continue out the process. So essentially, that's really the heart of the path animation for your no world worlds. This is just the techniques that you can use by using Blender and using the object curves, Bezier. If you need a curve that has both smooth connection points, as well as really angular, abrupt connection points. A lot of control. Or if you just need something to run around in a circle continuously on a smooth path, you can use the path animation. And if things to remember, things that I would kind of just leave that with, is that as you're moving this around, when you create animations, that for animation objects that are going to be parents of other objects that have animation, typically you want to use a parent object, and you want to zero that out from a location rotation perspective, so it's very kind of plain in the world. And then you essentially parent your object, the object you want to control that has an animation already, to this. So I'm saying that because if you don't have that relationship, essentially you can just create the like a cube or a sphere or something, set it at 0, 0, 0, and really that's all you need. You don't need to do anything more special than that to attach it to a curve. So I'm going to stop there just for a second. I'm going to quit screen sharing and jump back into the world with you. And let me come down and see if anybody's got any questions with that. Really, the purpose for the whole thing is that when you come into the nowhere worlds with this great GLTF composition, now that we have animations and things like that that can bring the worlds alive, really it makes all the difference, right? For somebody that's going to want to come into the world, be able to look around at things that move and just have something to look at other than really a plain world where nothing's moving. So that's really the purpose of it. And it's easy enough, really, if you follow the few basics of keyframes and curves and things like that, that you can really enliven the worlds. And if you guys take a look out at these little blue platforms and things like that, they're following, essentially, if you want to create transports that move from point A to point B, if you want them to move on a curve, these are actually moving almost like an egg-based curve, right? Up to the statue out there and then back. So think about the shape of an egg. And to do that, that was where a curve comes into play. Let me stop there and I'll come back down and if anybody has any questions.
I want to know when this world's going to be available in nowhere.
It's already, well, hey, it's available to release.
The one with the butterfly.
Oh, the butterfly world. I'm not sure. I'm not sure it will be. I don't know. That was just an idea for training, but it is. I mean, that object. I tell you what, from a Sketchfab, there's a lot of people that have created really cool stuff out on Sketchfab, and really, I mean, their work, in my opinion, doesn't get seen to such an audience, and this would be a prime opportunity to get the world into other people's purview, right? And do so in such a way that now you can be in the world, right? Because when you look on it on Sketchfab, it's like, okay, that's great. It's in my browser. It's 2D. I can't go into it. But now with this platform, right, you can go into those worlds. Now, most of what I would recommend doing, for things that I use off of Sketchfab and really deploy on Nowhere, I would create kind of an attributions, right? Something. Let me get down here. When using one of your content panels to create an attribution recognition for the model that you use. That's all most of the Sketchfab artists really look for anyway, because everything's really most of it's public domain with accreditation, right? So it's CC01 or CC0, CC4 is what you run into. That statue out there is a as CC4, right? So technically, I do need to add something. That's that statue of the angel of light. It's amazing. That model really is only like maybe 2,000 triangles. It really is. Those kind of objects on Sketchfab, I think, are really great to bring into the worlds because they don't put a lot of performance pressure on the platform and on your browser, right? You can render that pretty easily. So the more, as we create new worlds and things like that, bring those assets in. Just make sure that, that somewhere that you're accrediting the person and saying, hey, this is in my world, but most, like every texture you see in this is like a public domain texture, right? There's all kinds of sites that have the normal maps, the textures and colors, this marble that you see. I use the marble almost in every world. Anyway, so that's, as we kind of progress and do these new worlds, that's what I would recommend. Try to create some simple animations, right? Those are the things that people come in and say, hey, that looks kind of cool. It just moves around. It's a distraction, but it's a kind of an eye-pleasing distraction in a way. And then in some cases for platforms where you don't necessarily want to just teleport from point A to B for everything, create a teleport that people can jump on and ride and just let them ride around the world. Again, those are done with curves and keyframe animations.
Incredible. Very helpful.
All right, well, we've recorded the session, so I know sometimes I zoom through the steps in Blender, but you should be able to follow that again. I've shown you the two, right? The Sketchfab. If you go to Sketchfab, just do a search for Toll World, T-O-L World. That's what one is, and then just do butterfly, right? You'll find the two exact assets. You could create the same exact world. I mean, what I could also look to do is just package up that project, right? The little demo project, and put it somewhere that the Nowhere team can make available maybe with this video. And that way, at least you see the pieces in the same project, and then you can kind of like reverse engineer it, so to speak, and just learn it that way.
That would be awesome, Rod. And then for everyone that's here, I put in the chat our YouTube channel. Pardon my noise. My computer's being extra noisy today. I have dropped in a link to our YouTube channel where we upload all sorts of tutorials and stuff about Nowhere, and Rod's demo will be there. So that's going to be the place where you can like and subscribe our channel, and then you'll get announcements when this demo is available. Also, I'm going to drop in the chat a link to our Discord. We have a Discord channel that Rod is a part of, a big part of our community for world builders specifically that are interested in building Nowhere worlds using Blender, using these techniques. And if you have questions about stuff, you can drop in your questions there. If you come across things, Rod is always very quick to answer. We also have engineers that are able to answer the questions. So those are the places to like and subscribe so you can keep getting content like this.
All right, guys. We'll see you again. I think there's one or two in March, maybe. We'll cover a little maybe UV editing if you're not familiar with that. Awesome. But we will see you later. This recording will be available.
Yes. Thanks for the demo. That was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rod.
We'll see you.